Hello and happy Friday, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. We have been expecting you as we do every Friday during this hour, and we're so grateful to have you as part of our podcast community. You are joining Intentional Conversations VodCast and podcast. We do extract the audio and make this show available in podcast capacity. I am your host, Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the proud founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. And we are delighted every single week to bring this program opportunity to the broader community so that others can learn and can deepen their knowledge and understanding of all things diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, all the letters, right? Access, justice. And we don't take it for granted when people show up to be a part of this hour because it says to us that you value the content we are providing, and that makes us super happy. So one of the things that we like to always socialize around during our Intentional Conversations podcast is that at NWC, we really do believe in disability inclusion. So with that in mind, we do have closed caption that has been enabled for those who may benefit from it. I invite you to go to the chat right now. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from. It is always, always, always such a big treat for us to see all the many different geographies that are represented, not just in the United States, but yes, we are fortunate to even have folks that will join us from global markets, and we don't take that lightly. So wherever you are in the world today, welcome, whether it's morning or whether it's afternoon. I also want to extend a very special welcome to those that are joining us via LinkedIn Live. We know that we have many of our community members that instead of joining through the Zoom by registering in advance, they will catch us live on LinkedIn. And nonetheless, we are glad you're here. Be sure that you're using the comment section there on LinkedIn Live. We're watching it closely and bringing in those sentiments to our Zoom chat community. Cameras today, if you're part of our Zoom community, are encouraged. We love to see smiling faces, but they certainly are not required. We are just glad that you're here in whatever capacity, and we look forward to a great show with a wonderful guest co-host, and I cannot wait for you to meet him. Okay, so once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. Enjoy the show. Okay, let the conversations begin, and we will do just that right now. If you're just tuning in, again, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast, and we are so excited to have you here today. We are closing out the month of April. This is the last Friday of the month, but I dare not continue to place into your hearing some of the national observances that have taken place this month, but not for you to forget about it once May rolls around, but for you to continue to find ways to support these different communities. And so Black Women's History Month is in April, but again, let's continue to lean into all the contributions that Black women provide to our society. April was also the Arab American Heritage Month, so let's not forget how we can stand in solidarity and support those community members as well. Now, a few things that we like to do here at NWC as part of our Intentional Conversations podcast is to keep our community informed of some of the resources we have available to you. One of those resources is that every single week we release a new Inclusion Uncomplicated Simplified DEI series. And these are short clips, no more than 2 minutes in length, but they're packed with a lot of punch. It is our way of just helping you to learn a little bit more about all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we hope that you will check that out. Maybe even subscribe to our YouTube so that you can always be informed of new content dropping, and you can catch all of the archives. Okay, another thing that I like to make sure our community is aware of is that Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. This book was released a year ago this past January, and so it's been out there for quite some time now, but I continue to impress upon our supporters and our community members the importance of this book, and I would love it if you would get a copy, share a copy, write Amazon review, but definitely make sure that's part of your toolkit so that we can continue to deepen our knowledge and understanding. Those reviews make a big difference, by the way, so I'm grateful for you. If you haven't already subscribed to the NWC newsletter, it is Intentional Inclusionists, and this is available through LinkedIn. We release new content frequently. You can simply scan the QR code, or again, just go to our website, and you also can catch all of those articles through our website as well. But as always, we're so grateful to bring these resources to our group of supporters. Now, what I like to do every week is give you a little bit of what you have to look forward to for the upcoming Intentional Conversations podcast by way of introducing and teasing some of our guests. And so I'm going to do that quickly. I am so excited that kicking off the month of May on the 3rd, Julia Rock is going to be joining us. And in that conversation, we're going to be talking about career transitions, employer-employee relationships, and physical and mental health impacts on careers. Then the following week, I'm going to be welcoming Desiree B. Stevens. And in that conversation, we're going to be talking about the anti-DEI movement and healing in the space of any racism work, a really important and timely topic. So I hope that you will join us on May 10th. On May 17th, we have another great cohort, and that is Amber on Tavares. And in that Intentional Conversations, we will discuss the cause of oppression, the 4 woundings and tools we can implement to affect society. So if you don't know these folks, make sure you're looking them up in advance because they are definitely individuals with great insight, and I cannot wait for you to meet them. On May 24th, we have Paul Ladipo. If you do not follow Paul, third time, if you do not follow Paul on LinkedIn, make sure you look him up and follow him. He is a scroll stopper. I do not go on LinkedIn without stopping when I see any post from Paul Ladipo, and you will soon know why if you join us on May the 24th. So in that conversation, we're going to discuss the origins of the anti-DEI movement, 21st century racism, nice racism, I know, you're intrigued, right? And butchering the term woke. So join us for that conversation. And then last but not least, closing out the month of May, we have Casey Ariel Tobias. She's going to be here on the 31st. And in that conversation, we're going to be talking about the state of Black women-owned businesses, the legal landscape around DEI, particularly its implications on all race-based initiatives that aim to close access gaps and pathways to financial activism and social entrepreneurship. If that's not an amazing lineup, I'm not sure what you're considering an amazing lineup to be. I'm super excited, and I hope you are too. So stay tuned for those great conversations. Now, it is the time of our show that I give a very formal introduction of our guest co-host, and I do this by reading our guest co-host bio every single week. Sometimes our guest co-host will say, "Oh, Dr. White, please don't read my bio. Let's just jump into the conversation." But I find that it's so critical to do so. I want our community to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences, all the things that helps our guest co-host to show up the way that they do to the conversation and even to the space in which they are experts and practitioners in. And so today will be no different. I am so super excited to welcome Dr. A.C. Fowlkes, and I'm going to provide his introduction at this time. Dr. A.C. Fowlkes is not just a diversity and inclusion expert, he's a trailblazer. As a transgender man and clinical psychologist, he brings a unique blend of lived experience and professional expertise to his work as CEO of Fowlkes Consulting, a leading LGBTQ plus sensitivity and transgender inclusion firm. He also serves on the board of directors for the Trevor Project, and we will talk about that today and what that means and all of the important work that that organization is doing. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to bring Dr. Fowlkes into the spotlight, and I am going to ask that Dr. Fowlkes introduce himself in his own way, but we have a tradition here. And that tradition is before you actually greet the audience in your own way, you have to think about sharing something with us, oblige us if you would, that we would not know about you, Dr. Fowlkes, from reading your bio or maybe even looking at your LinkedIn profile. So what do you want to share with us today? Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here. So I think what I would like to share today is my love for fishing. When I do catch fish, they're the smallest fish in the history of the universe, but I enjoy it nonetheless. It's cathartic for me. And so That is something that you probably would not assume in speaking to me. Just in a nutshell, I am a trans man. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm a Forbes contributor. I'm on the board of directors for the Trevor Project. And I wear two separate hats. I'm the CEO of a consulting firm, which you mentioned, and I'm also the CEO of a psychiatric hospital. So those two worlds kind of come together in a really beautiful way to inform my work. And I think the other thing that I would mention is I'm a newlywed. I got married just under a year ago, believe it or not. And you did not know this, Doc, but I'm actually on my uh, anniversary vacation, and I only I'm only here today because it's you, and I just adore you, and I think the world of you, and so I literally am under the palm trees right now having this conversation. Um, and so yeah, I am a newlywed. We're coming up on 1 year, and I am. I always like to share. I'm a new dad. I was a mom for 20 years, and then 2 years ago, my son asked me, "Do you want me to call you dad?" Uh, and we had a heartfelt exchange in which he began to call me dad instead of mom, and it was transformative for me. So I've been a dad for 2 years, a husband for 1 year, and a part of this DEI community for quite some time now.
Yeah, I'm speechless right now because first and foremost, I have been so looking forward to this conversation and I feel tremendously honored and a little sad though
Don't
that I
be,
am
don't be.
holding you away from this celebration. But listen, congratulations are in order on so many fronts. I mean, I don't know if people see it because I have like the background, but I'm holding up your book now. I mean, you just went through a litany of things that have happened from milestone perspective. And so congratulations on all the things. And I'm so grateful that you decided to spend this hour with us during this important time of celebration in your life. And so we didn't take that lightly. Can we get some emojis and words of affirmation to place into the chat? Us to collectively express how grateful we are to have you here. Love it,
Thank
love it,
you.
love it. And I love the fact that you shared that you love to fish. You know, usually when we present that question, there are no parameters. We want people to share whatever they feel comfortable sharing. And it could be like favorite pastimes or hobbies. We get a lot of that. It could be maybe some other intersecting identities that helps them to show up the way that they do, that they want people to know about. But I always love when there's special like little habits or just pastimes because I don't know, I think it gives us just a deeper connection to our guest co-host. And so, yay for fishing. I'm not a fisher. I've never fished in my life, but I love the fact that it's something that you find a lot of pleasure in. So that is fantastic.
Well, I'll
Okay.
have to take you fishing one day, and we can both not catch fish together. Actually, it'd be great.
You know, what I hear a lot of people say is that just being out there, it's just so serene, it's relaxing, it's therapeutic. It's, I mean, I don't know, being one with nature, hearing all the sounds. I mean, so I can see how many people would be drawn to it. So anyway, I love that for you. Are you planning to fish while you are away this week?
So I won't be fishing this week, but I do have a fishing trip planned up in the next couple of weeks, and
Oh,
I'm very
good.
excited about it.
Well, it sounds like you don't care if you catch anything or not, but you know, from this community, we want you to catch something. We want to wish that for you, okay? Catch
Thank you.
something. Okay, fantastic. So let's jump right in. I want you to share with us a little bit more about your background. So, what inspired you to write Transgender Inclusion, all the things you want to ask your transgender coworker but shouldn't? I want you to talk to us about what was the impetus for this book, how was the book going so far, what type of reaction you're getting from it, and anything else that you want to socialize to help us to have a deepened understanding of what this book means to you and the transgender community.
Yeah, so I'm a transgender, as I mentioned. I'm a trans man. If you don't know what that means my sex assigned at birth was female, but I identify as male. And it's interesting because I do a lot of work in the trans inclusion space, and I work with a lot of companies, helping them to create safe or safer, I should say, spaces for LGBTQ plus employees and for trans employees in particular. And one of the things that I realized is that I would go to these organizations and I would do these presentations and I would get asked some of the most cringy questions, right? But it was okay because I signed up for it, right? Like, that's literally my job. My job is to answer the cringy questions. And so I would go and I would answer these cringy questions, and I would think to myself, there's probably very little opportunities for people to get answers to these types of questions if they don't have access to a subject matter expert. And if you work for a large organization and they bring in, someone who does this work, that's great, and you can ask those questions, and they can hold space for you. But if not, most folks don't have access. And I wanted to make this information accessible, right? I'm a firm believer that it is hard to hate up close. And when we understand, and when we interface, and when we engage with people that are not like us, we give ourselves an opportunity to learn and to grow and to become better people. And so I just wanted to create an environment where people could come and say, I've got these questions, let me get them answered, without placing the burden upon members of the transgender community to teach me, or B, having to come up with the money to have a conversation with a subject matter expert. And so that's kind of where it all started. And so one of the things that you'll see, there's an entire section in the book that's just dedicated to answering questions, the types of questions that you just can't ask people. Well, at least not unless you're wanting to end up in HR.
Yes. Well put. Well put. And by the way, because we know that you are traveling today, I've sensed just a couple instances where for a brief half second, you were going in and out. And so if we happen to lose you, I just want you to know we're going to stay put. We're going to keep talking among ourselves, right? And we're going to wait for you to rejoin. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so you said a lot. I want to unpack some of it. And by the way, the chat is chatting right now, and I love that. So keep all of your thoughts, your sentiments flowing into the chat. We love how that's additional way for us to engage. A couple things I want to amplify. You said that it's hard to hate up close, and I so love that. That's so true. It reminds me of what Brian Stevenson tells us all, the author of Just Mercy. But he talks about how we have to get proximate to people's lived experiences, and through that understanding, it helps us to center humanity in a way that deepens our understanding. First and foremost, it deepens our empathy and our compassion. And I think it just helps us to bridge those connections where maybe they did not exist previously. And so I love that. It is hard to hate up close. Yes, I wanted to amplify that. The other thing that you said is you signed up for this. And I want to just take a moment to kind of unpack that a little bit, because some could say, well, yes, you signed up for it in the sense that you decided, I want to now own a consulting firm where I am educating people on this topic. But you are also a member of the community. And what I want to bring attention to is that there is this big movement right now, and not just right now, but it has been for quite some time, for people to also lean into their own learning and understanding so that they aren't burdening individuals that are part of a community that maybe they don't identify with and they don't understand. And to me, what I think is important for us to not miss is that you could have stayed just as a member of the community, living your life, but you felt called to a higher place, a higher charge to also help others to bridge their knowledge gap. And I think that's important, because sometimes I think that we forget that those of us who are in the space of doing the work, broad work of DEI, B, J, A, all the letters again, is that we're separated from having those lived experiences. And I think that it does take a certain type of practitioner that is able to be a part of a community, but then also have the emotional capacity and the appetite to help others also be grounded in understanding. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Is there anything that you want to say to that, Dr. F?
Yeah, so I think it's so important. It's so interesting. I was just having this conversation literally earlier today about just representation matters, and it's important that we have people within a community speaking for that community. And there's this debate within DEI as to whether or not you have to actually be a member of a specific people group in
Right.
order to be able to speak to that group. And I'll not get into that debate, but what I will say is this: I do think that there's value in lived experience, and I do think that there's value
Yes.
in waking up and engaging with this thing in a very intimate way on a daily basis. And so, like, when I think about myself, as a trans man, as a Black trans man, my experience is very unique and very specific. So like even, my experience is different from what you would get from a white trans woman or from a white
Right.
trans man or from a Black trans woman or from a, right? We have to honor and hold space for those intersections. But I think that there's something that's very, very unique that comes from my lens. And I think that there's things that I would consider that other people would not consider. And the same is true, obviously, in the other direction. And so I think it's really important that we hold space for, that we create space for these different voices. I know when I first started my diversity work, my goal really was to normalize my existence. I have a family, I have a son who I'm trying to get to clean his room. I mean, I'm just like you. The name of the game wasn't really I'm just like you as much as it was that I'm actually not just like you, but that is not just okay. It's a beautiful thing. There's beauty in that, right?
Yeah.
And and I've come to this place now on my journey where I recognize, and I think especially as a transgender person, that my lived experience is very, very different from a lot of people, from
Mhm.
most people, I would actually say. But my goal in terms of where I am at this juncture in my life is no longer assimilation. It
Yeah.
was at one point. At one point, it was I just want to fully assimilate. You know, I want to fully assimilate. At this juncture in my life, it is I want to show up 100% as myself. I want to take up space as me, and for that to be not just okay but valued and honored, right? And
Yeah.
that's where I'm at this juncture, right? And that's a different place to be. And so it's not it's no more I just want you to know that I'm just like you. And it's more, you know what, actually I'm not just like you, but that's a beautiful thing, right? And you're not just like me, and that's a beautiful thing. And we can actually hold space for each other in that regard.
I love that. Yeah, we have someone in the chat that said, take up space as me, repeating and amplifying what you said. Take up space as me. And I think that everyone deserves that, and so I love that you've amplified that. So I want to talk about the intersection of being a transgender man and a clinical psychologist, because you shared before, not only are you CEO of your own consulting firm that focuses on LGBTQ plus sensitivity and transgender inclusion, but you also are the CEO of a psychiatric hospital. And so when you think about those two dynamics, how has your personal experience influenced your approach to diversity and inclusion consulting?
Yes, no, what I was going to say is that, my life has really been kind of this serendipitous journey, right? And when I look at where I am today, things that I experienced in my past have definitely informed where I am today. So why am I a clinical psychologist? I'm a clinical psychologist because when I was young, and I'll issue a trigger warning here. There is a mention of suicide. So if that's something that is, particularly sensitive for you or uncomfortable, you might want to step out for 30 seconds tops. Let me give you a moment to do that.
Thank you for that sensitivity.
Yes. When I was 15 years old, I lost my little brother. My brother, my 12-year-old brother, died by suicide. And I found myself, like most people that go through an experience like that, just completely overwhelmed and confused and burdened. And so I ended up going into mental health because I wanted to know what happened to my little brother. Like, what happened? How did we get here, right? And I ended up pursuing the field of psychology to try to get a better understanding of what happened to my brother. I also have an older brother. That was my younger brother. My older brother actually has what is called schizoaffective disorder, which, if you take bipolar disorder and you take schizophrenia and you put those two things together, you get schizoaffective disorder bipolar type, which is what my brother has.
Mhm.
And so I love my older brother. I absolutely adore him. But he struggles. He's in and out of psychiatric hospitals. He's in and out of jail. He finds himself in sometimes some pretty dangerous situations, just as an artifact of his illness. And so I wanted to understand him as well. I wanted to understand what happened to my younger brother, and I wanted to be able to help my older brother. And so I found myself, doing a deep dive in the world of mental health, in hopes of getting some answers. Now, as a clinical psychologist, hindsight is 2020, right? I can look back at my little brother and I can see the signs that I didn't know were signs at the time, the signs that I would wager my family didn't know were signs either. I look back now and I say, ah, I can see it now. I look at my older brother now, who I wish I could get him to listen to me about anything. Actually, he won't listen to me about. I'm the little brother, right? So I can have lots of ideas, but he won't listen to me. But I'm able to look at him, and I'm able to figure out how best to engage with him and how best to support him, while not infringing upon his autonomy, but still being supportive and holding space. And so that's how I got into mental health. How I got into LGBTQ specific consulting was I was working in the prison system, and I was seeing some things in the prison system that were really concerning to me. Inmates were being treated, in particular LGBTQ plus inmates. And again, with another trigger warning, this is a mention of sexual assault, so I'll pause here for a moment if you need to excuse yourself. In the prison system, I was seeing members of the LGBTQ community that were being victimized, and those experiences were being minimized because of their sexual orientation. And it was it troubled me to my core. I was like, I've got to figure out how to give voice to this specific people group. And it was very, very bad for transgender women. The things that I was seeing happen in the prison system. You have to understand that oftentimes transgender women are placed in male prisons, and so they are just experiencing just terrible, horrific conditions in that regard. And so I started volunteering to do presentations, to facilitate presentations, to try to normalize, right? To normalize the existence and the experience of people in this community. And so that's how I got into that work. And so those two things have led me to where I am now, which I'm very, very proud to say, as I sit here today, as the CEO of a psychiatric hospital, I'm actually, I don't know if you know this, Dr. Nika, I'm actually the first openly Black trans man to serve as a psychiatric hospital leader in the United States, which is phenomenal, and also really speaks to the fact that we have a lot of work left to do, right? Because we should be at a place where we're not still making firsts, but we are. But that all is kind of an artifact of that background, that story, that seeing the difference, without going on too long, because I could literally talk to you forever. And I was speaking to my older brother, who, this was a couple months ago, but right now he has me on a pause. I didn't know this. I found out from a close relative that he has decided to pause me, which he didn't tell me first. So so it would have probably been more effective had he told me, but he decided to pause me. Right now I am in the doghouse, I guess. But he plans to unpause me around his birthday, which I don't know if that is for his benefit or my benefit, but around his birthday I will be unpaused and we'll get to talk again. But before I was on pause, he asked me to promise that those things would not take place and would not happen in my hospital, that they wouldn't happen on my watch. And I made the commitment to him that there were certain things that just would not take place on my watch. And so all of that has led me to where I am today.
And I'm sure that probably makes you go harder. It probably makes you dig in even deeper. Those personal experiences are really instrumental in shaping what we become, how we do the work that we align ourselves to. And I'm hearing a lot of that in what you've shared. Thank you for sharing so much of your personal story with us today. I just want to unpack a couple things that come up for me. So first mentioning of the first, while I did the celebration, clapping emoji, it's always bittersweet when you hear about the first, right? Because there's so many different emotions that you can bring to being exposed to that type knowledge. Why are we just now being able to name certain community members as the first, right? And so, but nonetheless, there is still, I still do see it as something that's worthy of acknowledging and mentioning and talking about. But I relish when I think about not also acknowledging how bittersweet it can be too. The other thing is how in which you have found your place in this work has so much to do with what you've seen. You talked about the prison systems and how that really was jarring for you, and you knew that there was a better way, right? And you wanted to be that change that you felt everyone in society needed to see and feel. And then you also, as you were talking about your older brother and his illness, you mentioned not only was he just in and out of hospitals, but he also was in and out of jail. And so I'm sure the connection point to that, and that makes me just bring to the fore how our systems are not equipped and set up to effectively deal with mental illnesses in ways that really serves the people best. And so I just wanted to bring that to the conversation because I think it's really important to highlight. And then the last thing that I will say, I'm seeing some of the participants who are here, part of our podcast community, and I want to welcome Marisha Reese, by the way, of the Winters Group, who is the president of the Winters Group. They just celebrated their 40th year. And if you are not familiar with the Winters Group, they just did a 3-day conference called Racial Justice at Work, and it was amazing. But closing out this 3-day summit, Mary Frances talked about how when we think about all the different dimensions of diversity, how at the core, what we need to keep finding our way back to is humanity and love, right? And we all are deserving of being treated like humans, and of love and of care that allows us to be able to flourish. And so I just wanted to uplift that in the spirit of all that you've shared, Dr. F. And I'm ready to go to the next question. And this goes back to your book, Transgender Inclusion. Of course, all the questions that people want to ask, but they probably shouldn't. So this question relates to what are some of the common misconceptions about transgender individuals in the workplace that you aim to dispel in your book? And we're going to, by the way, place your book information into the chat for those that have not had a chance to order it yet.
Yes. So I would say the number one thing that comes to mind for me is transition. Not all trans people transition. And that is something that people often assume. And
Yeah.
not only assume, but there's this strange meter stick that's created out of transitioning, where it's like how transgender you are is somehow related to how much you have transitioned. And so that's one of the things that I would like to dispel, right? That's not a thing. So being transgender is just a matter of self-identification. You don't have to transition in any way, shape, or form to be transgender, period, full stop. If you say that you're transgender, period, full stop. There are 3 widely recognized forms of transition, right? There's medical transition, legal transition, and social transition. Oftentimes when we're thinking about transition, we're thinking about medical transition because that's what we see most often in media, right? We're seeing individuals that are going through. It's often the case that we're thinking about medical transition in that regard. Social transition is what we interface with the most, though, right? That's someone letting you know their pronouns, their chosen name, right? It's the way that they show up in the world. It's their gender expression. It's their manner of dress, their manner of grooming. And then you have legal transition, which is like your gender markers. It's your, it's your name and it being actually legally changed. It is those types of things. So those 3 widely recognized forms of transition. And what ends up happening is oftentimes people transition in some of the ways, if not all of the ways. And sometimes people don't transition in any of the ways. It's completely valid and it doesn't make them any less transgender. There's a lot of reasons that people don't transition. And for a lot of folks, it's cost prohibitive, right?
Yeah.
It's expensive to transition. And if you pick up the book, you'll actually see where I break down the price of transition. And it's expensive. I mean, and going through an entire medical transition alone could cost you very easily over $100,000 to
Mhm.
transition medically. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of folks that just can't afford to transition, in particular members of the transgender community, because even though we tend to be more highly educated than members of the general population, we also, in a way that's really hard to explain aside from discrimination, are more likely to be unemployed or underemployed. And so having the money to be able to transition is often an issue. It's something that is out of reach, for some just out of reach, for some way out of reach, but it's something that people often are not able to do. Another thing is that some folks just don't want to transition, or and that's okay, and that's valid as well. They might not feel like it's a necessary part of the journey, or they might have fear associated with transitioning. We have to think about how many individuals literally lose their loved ones and their family members because they choose to transition. The risk to employment, the risk to housing. I mean, there's just so much risk that people oftentimes will opt out of that process because it's a scary and daunting process. So if I had to dispel a myth, it would be that trans folks are trans because they are in the process of transitioning. Trans is not for transition. Trans is for transgender, right? And that is
Mhm.
that is the myth I would dispel.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much by digging into your book, and I'm not yet done, but so much of what you just touched on is in the book. So I do want to remind people that if you're looking for a really great resource, Transgender Inclusion is the great resource. We have shared that link into the chat. I want to highlight a couple of things that you mentioned: medical, legal, and social. I think that's important to amplify because I'm not sure let me just speak for myself. Before reading your book, there was a lot that I did not know. And so I think that knowledge is power, and I want to make sure that this community is seeing it as our responsibility to gain more knowledge so that we can have deeper understanding, right, of the trans community. You also highlighted the fact that we need to respect people's decisions, right? It doesn't matter whether they have, undertaken all the three categories that you just mentioned: medical, legal, and social. We need to respect people's decisions. And I think that is critical to amplify. And the last thing, Dr. Fowlkes, you said that members of the trans community are among the highly educated individuals, but yet they are also very much underemployed or unemployed. And I think we have to just sit with that, if nothing else, for just 5 seconds to make sure it sinks in, because
Mhm.
that's critical.
Yes.
Okay. I can tell you right now, we're like 20 minutes for the top of the hour. We're going to have to invite you back because there's so much I want to dig into, but I also want to make sure I give the audience a chance to ask some questions. And so I'm going to give you a warning now that we will be transitioning after this next question to take our audience questions and comments. If you're part of our Zoom community and you would love to be able to present your question or comments live, then use the raise hand feature that lets us know that we can invite you to be unmuted. We'll add you to the spotlight. Or if you would like to present your questions into the chat, that is totally permissible. We'll be watching it closely. For those that are on LinkedIn Live, go to those comments. We want your questions as well. We're watching that comment section, and we will take as many questions as we can. While you're percolating on maybe those curiosities that are popping up, I do want to go to the next question. And this is about the fact that on March 31st of this year, people around the world recognize and commemorated Transgender Day of Visibility. And for those who are not familiar with the Transgender Day of Visibility, it serves as an opportunity to celebrate the lives and contributions of transgender individuals, while also bringing to the fore the challenges, right, and the discrimination that members of that community continue to face. As someone who is directly a part of this community, Dr. F., how do you think the world showed up this year in terms of Transgender Day of Visibility? What did you appreciate? What do you want to see differently next time?
Representation matters, right? I think that when it comes to Trans Day of Visibility, we need to see more trans folks of color. We need to see trans folks of color that have been successful and that have defied the odds. I'd like to see more of that. I'd also like to see organizations have a willingness to stand firm on their support of the transgender community. And that is despite backlash. And that is despite the fact that there are some people that are not going to be okay with that. And some people that are going to, try to paint it in a negative light. I find that loyalty is something that is earned through steadfastness, right? And by standing by a community. And to be honest, the LGBTQ community, we're actually very loyal consumers. And I think individuals, companies would benefit from understanding that having loyalty from a group of people that is underserved and often either overlooked or looked at negatively in the long run is a great incentive or a great business case if you need one. Now, in the real world, oftentimes people feel like they need a business case. I'd like for us to just be good humans and just say, let's just do it because it's good humaning, right? But
Good humaning. There you go.
humaning. But if you need a business case, the LGBTQ community, we're very loyal consumers, and we take note of the organizations and the corporations and the companies that create space for us, and we take note of the ones that don't. And so if you need a business case, there you have it. But I would say more important than that is just being a good human being, right? Being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you are bringing your best self to bear. And I think we do that by holding space for everyone, the LGBTQ plus community included.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm going to continue to go forth. But I want to highlight something that appeared into the chat. The fear of offense is real. This is an opportunity to combat the ignorance. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that into the chat. And you said something that was really important that I want to uplift. Loyalty is earned from steadfastness. You're dropping some gems today, and I want everyone to catch every single one of them. I mean, that is so profound to me, not only when I think about this conversation of normalizing and creating spaces that are free of discrimination for member of the transgender community, but I also think about just this attack that's happening right now on the space of DEI in general. Steadfastness is so important. We have to hold our feet to the fire and stay firm in the value that we know being intentional around this work brings to everyone, not just certain communities, but to everyone. And so loyalty is earned through steadfastness. And I agree with you, Dr. F. I think that there's been too much historical focus on the business case. And not that that's not important. I think that those talking points has its place because we have to be strategic. We have to play chess and not checkers and think about our different audiences. But I love the fact that now we're growing to be much more intentional about just talking about it from the perspective of it is humaning, to use the language that you just used. It is about centering humanity. It is about the value proposition to all people in all spaces and places. And so I just wanted to uplift that as well. So as you were sharing a little bit about your thoughts on how well, or maybe some areas of improvement that the world showed up to Transgender Day of Visibility, you talked about some of the mistreatment that finds its way into workplaces for members of the transgender community. And so I want you just to talk a little bit more about what are you seeing in terms of some of the practices that organizations find themselves leaning into, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, that creates exclusion for members of the transgender community. So maybe talk about the prevalence of mistreatment, harassment, and what strategies can you share to help organizations to combat that, and individuals who want to be allies to help influence their organizations to systematically combat that.
Well, one of the things that I like to say to people when I am working with them as a consultant is it's important for you to ask yourself the question, does this actually need to be gendered?
Mm.
Let me just stop. Let me say that
Yeah.
again for the balcony, Doc. All right.
There you
Does
go.
this need to be gendered? There are so many things that we gender unnecessarily, like literally for no reason at all. Like there's no value add. I don't know why we do it. and it causes unnecessary hardship for folks that are trans and or non-binary. And so does this actually need to be gendered, right? Does the locker room need to be gendered? Does the bathroom need to be gendered? Do the classroom need to be gendered? Do the boys need to sit on the right and the girls on the left? And is there a reason for that? Is there a value add in that? Do the dorms need to be gendered? Does everything need to be gendered? Why is it like literally all the way down to like, hey kids, we're going to get into a line. All the boys get on the right and all the girls get on the left. And it's like, why? Why is that a thing? Does this need to be gendered? When it comes to work, when it comes to our policies, our dress policies, for example, does that need to be gendered? No, it doesn't. Why don't we focus on professionalism as opposed to gender expression? So I don't need to say your skirt doesn't need to be more than 2 fingers above your knee. Like, just stop, right?
Full
Does
stop.
it need to be gendered? That's the question of the day, right? Let's focus on whether or not this is a necessary layer. There might be some instances where you're like, absolutely, this has to be gendered. I'd love to hear them. I very rarely come across something where I'm like, yeah, absolutely. There's this, I don't know how we would make it if this weren't gendered. It's so rarely the case that I just can't even think of an example. So that would be one thing that I would say for sure. I would also say that it is very, very important for us. And, this is kind of an indirect line of reasoning here, but it's very important for us to understand, and I talk about this in the book, that transgender folks, even though they experience a lot of maltreatment in the workplace, what we know from the research is that oftentimes they don't report it.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they don't report it for fear of losing the job that is so hard for them to get in the first place. We've talked about the fact that transgender folks are often underemployed or unemployed. So if you finally land a job, are you going to risk it by going to human resources and saying, I've been wronged, I've been slighted, I've been hurt, I've been harmed? Probably not, right? Because you've got to be able to survive. And so oftentimes trans folks won't actually say anything. That's really important if you were in human resources, because human
Right.
resources oftentimes rely on the existence of grievances in order to address a thing. Well, if you're talking about a community that is not likely to issue a grievance, then you have to be very, very proactive and intentional. And you have to be making decisions based not on someone coming to you and saying, I've been wronged, but based on what you understand to be the most appropriate way to interact with and engage with this people group. So it takes you being intentional and you being forward thinking, because the truth of the matter is we know the data shows us very clearly that trans folks are not likely to come to you and say, I've been wronged,
Right.
because they're afraid of losing that job. They're
Right.
afraid of the repercussions.
Right, right. And again, when we think about intersecting identities and, the trans community, that just compounds even more of the psychological danger that they may feel like they're in, which, prevents them from being able to speak up and advocate for themselves. And so I'm so glad that you brought that to the conversation as well. You said they need to be intentional, forward thinking, progressive, proactive. And I want to talk about this proactivity because I can tell you that in the years of being in this space, there's probably have been at least a minimum of 5 times that clients we have worked with that have reached out to say, we have an employee that has come forward to share that they are transitioning and we don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were scrambling, trying to figure out what to do at the last minute. And so I think that if organizations want to be progressive, want to be intentional and proactive, all those things that we just named, they need to now start figuring out what do we need to do to make sure we are prepared to have a welcoming culture and environment for transgender employees, and not necessarily wait for someone to, maybe they will get brave, maybe they will, but maybe they won't, right? So to your
Mm-hmm.
point, if they
Mm-hmm.
aren't speaking up, then there's such missed opportunities. And so I love that you are helping us to think about this. And very simply, I put it into the chat because it was worth repeating, but we have to start interrogating ourselves around simple questions like, does this need to be gendered? And if so, why?
Mm-hmm.
Simple, just have a conversation. That
Yes.
conversation alone, I think, is so powerful to opening up people's perspectives and having the right dialogue. And so do that. Ask those questions. Ask those questions. Okay. I want to keep going. I want to keep going. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So y'all, I mean, this is your chance, but I'm going to keep going because I have a lot that I want to know too. Okay. So let's talk about ways that organizations can best prepare and educate their workforce on transgender issues without causing unintended harm for those who are part of the community.
Yeah, so we've got to stop relying on our employees to teach us.
Yeah.
We got to stop. We got to stop. We we invest in the things that are important to us, right?
Yeah.
We need to invest in education. We need to invest in subject matter expertise. We just need to make that investment. Bring in someone who does this, that can answer these questions, and so that you're not putting that burden on the weight, or putting that weight on the shoulders of a group of people that are already experiencing oftentimes a lot of weight. And so we've got to bring in the folks that can answer the questions. And if we're going to have folks within an organization that are going to serve and sharing their expertise, we need to compensate them. Let me just
Yes.
stop. Let me just put that right there and
Yes.
stop for a second. Okay. It shouldn't be that you have your actual job and then you're also the co-chair of the ERG or whatever, and there's no acknowledgement of that outside of attaboy. That's not okay. We need to compensate people for their time and their effort and their energy, and for their expertise if they choose to lend it to us in that way, right? And so those are the two things that I would say right away is, invest in bringing in the external folks, and if you're going to utilize internal folks, compensate them for it, right? It's not just the 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 compensation shouldn't simply be the acknowledgement of a job well done. I don't know about you, but my mortgage doesn't get paid by an acknowledgement of a job well done.
Absolutely. No,
And so
no,
let's,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
let's pay the individuals commensurate with what their worth is relevant to
yes.
having those lived experiences, having the expertise to be able to talk freely about the implications and to really help educate others. I'm totally with you on that. Um, what are some success stories that you've seen in terms of organizations doing this well, really, really effectively, meaningfully supporting members of the transgender community?
Well, I've seen it done, well, in instances where people have been forward thinking and have brought in support before it was needed, and that's great. Who have created, like transition manuals and handbooks, and have shown all of the ways that the company
Yeah,
will support you through your transition, whether it be legal, social, or medical, all of the things and all of the benefits that the company has, the things that were created with you in mind, right? Like that's when I see companies do this well, I see companies create something with the transgender person in mind. And
mind.
that is I think probably one of the most powerful things that you can do. Now, if it is the case that you find yourself in a bind and you're like, oh my goodness, someone just told me they're transitioning. Oh no, what am I going to do? Which unfortunately that happens. That organization sometimes didn't think about it until they need the help. Fret not, right? There are folks out there that can come in and can help and can be of assistance to you. Some companies I've seen, I've had the great pleasure of going into companies where they've said, hey, we have this person that is leaving. They're going on a holiday. They're leaving as, Sam. They'll be returning as Samantha. And we're trying to prepare, the workforce for this transition. And then they'll bring, someone in like me to come in and answer questions so that when Samantha comes back, Samantha's not bombarded with questions.
Yeah,
But all of those
yeah.
questions have already been answered. And so that's, I think, some of the greatest success stories have been individuals being able to show up fully as themselves without having to carry the burden of educating those around them.
I love that. Yeah. Again, it goes back to just being intentional, right? Being
Yeah.
intentional and solving for creating safe workplaces in ways that are meaningful to the individuals that are part of that community. So the top 2 to 3 practices that individuals who want to be allies to their transgender coworkers but are unsure exactly how to do that. what are those top two or three?
Pronouns.
Yep.
Listen, we've got to normalize the sharing of pronouns. It can't just be that only trans and non-binary folks are sharing their pronouns, right? Because then you're placing people in a position where they're having to out themselves in order to have their pronouns be respected. And so we've got to normalize the sharing of pronouns. It's really important. I recently did a post about it, and it was interesting because there were some folks that have, some differing opinions. But the truth of the matter is it's such a small gesture that can create such safety. Why would you not do it? It's just good humaning, right? Share your pronouns, put it in your email signature, put it next to your name on your video conferencing software. Share your pronouns, and that lets other people know that it's safe for them to share theirs. The other thing that I would say is that it's really important that you honor a person's chosen name, right? You know, individuals, transgender and non-binary folks often have what we call dead names, which is, the name that you were given, but not the name that you currently utilize. Like for me, my parents did not name me AC, right? But oftentimes what happens is our given name is a name that's highly gendered. And because it's highly gendered, it increases the likelihood that we experience misgendering when we utilize that name. So for me, my parents didn't name me AC, but my given name is highly gendered. And I get misgendered much more when my given name is used. And so I don't utilize that name. Honoring that is super important in the workplace, that in all internal facing communications and all external facing communications, and in every space in the office place. So what does that mean? That means in the email, which oftentimes our emails at work require the use of our name in some way, that the use of our name in our email needs to be our chosen name and not our given name. That when we're showing up in databases and spreadsheets and populating in systems, that it is our chosen name and not our given name. And sometimes that takes effort, and sometimes it takes money, right? Because we have to actually change the coding and get into the infrastructure, but it's worth it to create the safe space for your employees. So, this is one of those things where you don't want to just talk about it. You want to be about it, and you want to follow through. And that's something that you can do that is a small gesture, but that creates so much safety. So pronouns, chosen name, those are the top two. And then I would come back to not all trans people transition, right? And not expecting that, not making that, not engaging in this strange gatekeeping where like, you're not really trans unless you transition, because there's a lot of reasons that people don't transition, and all of them are valid. And again, being transgender it's a matter of self-identification. And so I know you just asked for two or three, so I'll stop there. But there are many things that we can do and that we should do. Many things that we can and that we should do to create safer spaces.
Yes, absolutely. And some of them are so small and practical, but very meaningful. This has been such a rich hour. We'll have to invite you back because I know that there's so much more that we can delve into to help us deepen our understanding and standing in support of the transgender community. I want to go ahead and say my goodbyes and my thank yous. I so appreciate your time today, and so honored that you decided to sacrifice time on this really important celebration period in your life. And I don't take that for granted. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I want to thank this community for showing up. I hope that you feel like you're better off, more knowledgeable now that you have shown up. I want to give you our last 15, 20 seconds to close us out in whatever way that feels good for you. So Dr. Fowlkes, what would you like to socialize, and what kind of parting remarks would you like to leave us with?
I actually just saw someone put in the comments that you should not say preferred pronouns or preferred name. And I actually wrote a Forbes article about that.
That's
I
true.
agree
The word
100%.
preferred. Yeah. People are saying drop that. Yeah.
Yes, I agree 100%. I would like to just kind of double click on that. Let's get rid of preferred. I prefer white rice over brown rice. That's a preference, right?
Yeah.
That's right. But brown rice is still a viable option if I'm hungry enough. And when we say preferred, we give the impression that something else is a viable option. And when it comes to your pronouns and when it comes to your name, there is no other. That's it. Period. Full stop. So let's get rid of preferred. I'll double click on that, and we'll end with that. That is absolutely true, and I couldn't agree more.
Fantastic. Thank you. Again, get the book, Transgender Inclusion. Dr. Fowlkes' website address is in the chat, as well as we'll drop her LinkedIn if it's not already there, his LinkedIn if it's not already there. But I'm so grateful. Thank you so very much. If you found this to be valuable, share it out. That's one simple thing we can do. Share this conversation out with others in our networks, in our communities. And I am so grateful that we've had this time with you. Have a great and safe weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.